My name is Diane. I'm 28. And at my sister's wedding, I was seated in the hallway, outside, next to the trash cans. Let that sink in for a moment. While 200 guests sat inside a beautiful ballroom with crystal chandeliers and white roses, I was given a folding chair in a service corridor, right next to where the caterers dumped their garbage. The sound of clinking glasses and laughter echoed through the closed doors, but all I could hear clearly was the hum of industrial refrigerators and the occasional crash of dishes being cleared. She looked at me, smirked, and said, "Guess you don't count." Those 4 words. 4 simple words that cut deeper than any knife ever could. Not shouted, not screamed, just delivered with that cold, calculated cruelty that only family members know how to perfect. The kind of cruelty that comes wrapped in a smile, delivered in a wedding dress, blessed by everyone who matters. If you've ever been treated like you didn't belong by your own family, like this video, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Because this story might feel uncomfortably familiar, and you need to know you're not alone in this pain. I sat there in that hallway for 23 minutes before everything changed. 23 minutes of listening to my sister's perfect wedding through a closed door, while I stared at industrial mops and cleaning supplies. The air smelled like bleach and leftover food instead of the gardenias and vanilla candles that filled the reception hall. I could hear the band playing, hear my father's speech about his beautiful daughters, plural, while one of those daughters sat forgotten in a service corridor like a piece of unwanted furniture. The contrast was deliberate. Everything about this was deliberate. Inside that ballroom, light danced off crystal glasses and reflected in mirrors that lined the walls. The ceiling dripped with fairy lights and silk draping that probably cost more than my car. 200 people in designer clothes celebrated love and family and new beginnings, while I sat on a metal folding chair next to a trash bin that reeked of shrimp cocktail and wilted flowers. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't storm into that reception and demand answers, or throw the tantrum that everyone was probably expecting, maybe even hoping for. Instead, I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, my gift carefully balanced beside me, and I breathed. In through my nose, out through my mouth, the way my therapist taught me when the anxiety gets too overwhelming. I chose silence. Not because I was weak, but because I was finally strong enough to recognize a trap when I saw one. You see, this wasn't the first time Rebecca had found a way to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy. This was just the most public, most humiliating, most perfectly executed example of a pattern that had been building for 28 years. The golden child and the afterthought, the princess and the peasant, the one who could do no wrong and the one who could do nothing right. I stood up, took my gift, and walked out without a word. 5 minutes later, everything inside that room collapsed. But let me back up, because you need to understand how we got here. You need to understand the family dynamic that made this moment inevitable, carved in stone years before Rebecca ever met her husband, years before she started planning what she called the wedding of the century. Rebecca is 31, 3 years older than me, and she learned early that the world would bend itself around her smile. She was the child who got the bigger bedroom, the newer clothes, the college fund that somehow never quite stretched to cover my education too. She was the daughter who brought home boyfriends that our parents adored, who chose a career that made them proud at dinner parties, who called every Sunday and sent flowers on birthdays, and knew exactly how to be the perfect daughter. I was the one who asked too many questions, the one who chose art over business, who dated the wrong guys, who forgot to call, who never quite learned how to make myself small enough to fit into the spaces left over after Rebecca filled up all the room. For years, our parents painted this dynamic as natural. Rebecca was driven while I was creative. Rebecca was responsible while I was free-spirited. Rebecca was mature while I was still figuring things out. They had 1,000 gentle ways to explain why she got more, why she mattered more, why her needs came first and mine came last, if they came at all. "Keep the peace, Diane," my mother would say whenever I tried to point out the inequality. "You know how Rebecca is. She's just stressed. She doesn't mean it. Be the bigger person." always be the bigger person, always be understanding, always be the one who bends, who compromises, who disappears when there isn't enough room for both of us to exist in the same space. I became an expert at making myself invisible. At Christmas dinners, I learned to speak only when spoken to. At family photos, I learned to stand in the back. At birthday parties, I learned to celebrate Rebecca's achievements like they were my own, because God knows no one was going to celebrate mine. But this wedding was supposed to be different. For once, I thought, maybe family meant something. Maybe blood was thicker than years of casual cruelty. Maybe her happiness would make her generous, would make her remember that we shared a childhood, shared parents, shared DNA, even if we shared nothing else. I was so incredibly naive. Subscribe and comment below if you've ever been the family scapegoat, because this story is about to get so much worse before it gets better. The seating arrangement wasn't an accident. It wasn't an oversight. It wasn't the wedding planner's mistake or a misunderstanding with the venue. It was a choice, deliberate and calculated, designed to send a message to every single person in that room about my worth, my place, my value in Rebecca's new life. She approached me during the cocktail hour, radiant in her custom wedding dress that cost more than I make in 3 months. She moved through the crowd like a queen, accepting congratulations and air kisses, posing for photos with relatives who had flown in from across the country to witness her perfect day, and then she stopped in front of me. "Diane," she said, and that smile, that practiced, pageant-perfect smile, never wavered. "I need to talk to you about dinner." I should have known. I should have seen it in her eyes, in the way she glanced around to make sure people were watching, in the way she straightened her shoulders like she was preparing for battle. But I was still hoping, still believing that somewhere under all that silk and satisfaction was the sister who used to build blanket forts with me when we were kids. "The thing is," she continued, her voice just loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "we had some last-minute additions to the guest list. Family friends of David's parents. You know how it is. And unfortunately, we're just a little short on space in the main dining room." She paused, tilted her head with mock sympathy, and delivered the killing blow. "So we've set up a lovely little spot for you in the hallway. It's quieter there, more private. I thought you'd prefer it, actually. You've always been a bit overwhelmed by crowds." Overwhelmed by crowds. Like my preference for small gatherings was a character flaw. Like my introversion was a disease that might be contagious if I sat too close to the important people. But it was the next part that shattered something inside me. She leaned closer, close enough that only I could hear, and whispered, "Guess you don't count." Then she straightened up, patted my arm like I was a child who needed comforting, and glided away to accept more congratulations on her perfect wedding from her perfect guests in her perfect life. I stood there for a full minute, frozen in place, while the cocktail hour swirled around me. I watched relatives I hadn't seen in years, family friends who used to bounce me on their knees, college friends who knew both of us when we were younger and kinder to each other. None of them looked at me. None of them questioned the arrangement. None of them asked why the bride's sister was being exiled to eat dinner in a hallway. Because this is what happens when you're trained to be invisible. People learn not to see you. The gift in my hand suddenly felt heavier. I had spent weeks working on it, months planning it, and years saving for it. It wasn't just a present. It was a piece of my heart wrapped in silver paper, a testament to the relationship I thought we still had, proof that I still believed in us despite everything. Inside that carefully wrapped box was a hand-painted portrait of our childhood home, the house where we grew up, where we shared a bathroom and fought over the last piece of pizza and stayed up too late watching movies. Our parents didn't know we were old enough to see. I had worked from an old photograph, spending hours getting the light just right on the front porch, where we used to sit and talk about our dreams. In the corner of the painting, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, I had painted 2 small figures. Rebecca and me, maybe 7 and 4 years old, holding hands on the front steps. It was based on a real photograph, one of the few pictures of us together where we both looked genuinely happy. The portrait had taken me 3 months to complete. I had worked on it after my day job, spending evenings and weekends layering paint and perfecting details, pouring all my love and hope and desperate desire for connection into every brush stroke. It was supposed to be a bridge, a peace offering, a reminder that we were sisters before we were anything else. Now it felt like evidence of my own stupidity. For the first time in my adult life, I stopped waiting for permission to leave. I walked through that crowd of wedding guests with my head high and my gift clutched in my hands. I nodded politely at relatives who tried to engage me in small talk. I smiled at family friends who asked about my job, my dating life, my plans for the future. I played the part of the gracious sister for as long as it took to reach the hallway where my folding chair waited next to the trash cans. But I didn't sit down. Instead, I walked to the gift table, where dozens of beautifully wrapped boxes and envelopes created a mountain of generosity and good wishes for the happy couple. Wedding presents from Tiffany and William Sonoma, checks in cream-colored envelopes, crystal vases, and silver picture frames that would help Rebecca and David build their perfect life together. I placed my gift carefully on the table, right in the center where it couldn't be missed. Then I took out my phone and wrote a simple note. For Rebecca, with love from the sister who still remembers when you were kind. Open this one first in front of everyone. You'll understand why. Diane. I tucked the note under the ribbon and stepped back. Then I walked out of that wedding, out of that hotel, and out of Rebecca's perfect life. I didn't make a scene. I didn't slam doors or shout accusations or demand apologies. I simply left, the same way I had learned to disappear from every family gathering, every holiday dinner, every moment when my presence became inconvenient. But this time, I left something behind. I was 3 miles away when my phone started ringing. I was sitting in my car in a parking lot overlooking the lake, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and pink that reminded me of the colors I had used for the sky in Rebecca's painting. My hands were shaking, not from anger anymore, but from something that felt dangerously close to relief. The first call was from my mother, then my father, then my Aunt Linda, then Cousin Michael, then numbers I didn't recognize, but that probably belonged to wedding guests who had somehow gotten hold of my contact information. I let them all go to voicemail, because back in that ballroom, something was happening that I wasn't there to see. The dinner service had begun, and according to tradition, the bride and groom were opening their gifts between courses, sharing the joy of their generous friends and family with all their guests. Rebecca, radiant and confident, had spotted my gift immediately. The painting-sized box wrapped in silver paper, the note that clearly marked it as something special, something that deserved an audience. She would have been curious, maybe even pleased that I had obviously put thought and effort into her present despite the way she had treated me. She opened it in front of everyone just like the note suggested. I imagine the moment of silence that must have followed. 200 guests leaning forward to see what the bride's sister had given her, expecting another crystal vase or monogrammed picture frame. Instead, they saw our childhood home. They saw 2 little girls holding hands on the front steps. They saw a love letter to our shared past, a reminder of who we used to be before we became who we are now. But they also saw something else. Because hidden in the back of the frame, tucked behind the painting where only someone opening the gift would find it, was a second piece of paper. Not a note this time, but a photograph. A screenshot, actually, of a text message conversation between Rebecca and her maid of honor from 3 weeks before the wedding. A conversation where Rebecca had written, "I can't wait to put Diane in her place at the wedding. I'm thinking the hallway by the kitchen. Let her eat with the staff where she belongs." A conversation where her maid of honor had responded with laughing emojis and, "You're terrible. She's still your sister." A conversation where Rebecca had replied, "Barely. She's always been an embarrassment. This wedding is about celebrating success, not charity cases." The phone calls came in waves, because I had done what everyone expected me to never have the courage to do. I had told the truth. Not by screaming it or demanding attention or making myself the center of drama, but by simply presenting the evidence and letting people draw their own conclusions. Let me tell you what happened next, because the people who called me that night couldn't stop talking about it. Rebecca's face went white when she saw the screenshot, then red, then white again. She tried to laugh it off at first, tried to dismiss it as a joke taken out of context, but everyone in that room could do the math. Everyone remembered where I had been seated. Everyone had seen the folding chair by the trash cans and thought maybe it was unfortunate but not intentionally cruel. Now they knew better. The music had stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. 200 people sat in perfect silence while the bride of the hour realized that her perfect day had just become the day everyone learned exactly who she really was. And then she screamed. Not a sob or a gasp or a quiet breakdown that could be explained away as wedding stress. She screamed like something was tearing her apart from the inside, like the image she had spent 3 decades crafting had just shattered in front of everyone who mattered to her. She screamed at her maid of honor for not deleting the messages. She screamed at her new husband for not defending her. She screamed at my parents for raising me to be vindictive. She screamed at the universe for ruining her perfect day. But mostly, she screamed because for the first time in her life, she couldn't control the narrative. She couldn't charm her way out of it, or blame me for being too sensitive, or convince everyone that this was somehow my fault. The evidence was right there, in her own words, in her own voice, showing her own heart. My father, according to my Aunt Linda, stood up in the middle of Rebecca's breakdown and said something I never thought I'd hear from him. We owe Diane an apology, a lot of apologies. My mother, who had spent 28 years telling me to be the bigger person, apparently spent the rest of the evening crying into her wine about how she had failed both her daughters, one by enabling her cruelty and one by ignoring it. David's family, who had welcomed Rebecca as the perfect addition to their perfect family, suddenly looked at their new daughter-in-law like they had never seen her before. Because they hadn't? Not really. They had seen the performance, the carefully crafted image of the woman who was sweet and kind and deserving of their son. They had never seen the woman who would exile her own sister to eat dinner next to trash cans and then mock her for it in private texts. The wedding ended early. Not officially, but the celebration was over. Guests started making excuses and leaving as soon as they decently could, desperate to escape the uncomfortable truth that they had all been complicit in something cruel. The band packed up their instruments while the bride sobbed in the bathroom, and the groom tried to figure out how to salvage something from the wreckage of what was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives. But I wasn't there for any of it. I was sitting by the lake, watching the last light fade from the sky, finally understanding what peace felt like. For 28 years, I had carried the weight of being the disappointing daughter, the difficult sister, the family member who never quite fit into the spaces everyone else occupied so naturally. I had twisted myself into smaller and smaller shapes, trying to become someone who deserved love instead of someone who demanded it as a birthright. I had spent decades believing that if I could just be good enough, quiet enough, understanding enough, maybe they would see me the way they saw Rebecca. Maybe they would make room for me at the table instead of seating me in the hallway. But sitting there in my car, with my phone buzzing with calls I wasn't ready to answer, I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. I had never been the problem. The problem was a family system that needed a scapegoat, that needed someone to be less than, so that someone else could be more. The problem was parents who chose peace over justice, who found it easier to silence the victim than confront the aggressor. The problem was a culture that taught me to be grateful for scraps instead of hungry for the full meal. The problem was never me, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt free. Free from the obligation to make myself smaller so that Rebecca could be bigger. Free from the exhausting work of pretending that cruelty was just family dynamics. Free from the hope that had been slowly poisoning me for years. The hope that if I just tried harder, loved better, asked for less, maybe they would finally see my worth. I drove home that night with my phone turned off, and my heart turned toward a future that didn't include waiting for permission to exist. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I had started the evening sitting next to trash cans in a service hallway, breathing air that smelled like cleaning products and forgotten food. I was ending it beside a lake that reflected stars, breathing air that tasted like freedom and possibility. From the hallway to the open road, From the folding chair to the driver's seat. From the afterthought to the author of my own story. Walking away isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the first time you choose yourself. And sometimes choosing yourself means accepting that the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally have been loving you with conditions all along. Sometimes it means realizing that the family you were born into isn't the family you deserve. Sometimes it means understanding that blood doesn't make someone family, and family doesn't give someone the right to diminish your worth. Sometimes it means sitting next to a lake at sunset, watching the light change and feeling grateful for the first time in years. Not for what you received, but for what you finally found the strength to leave behind. The calls continued for weeks. My parents wanted to talk, to explain, to make things right. Extended family members who had watched me be minimized for years suddenly wanted to reach out, to let me know they had noticed. They had always cared. They just hadn't known how to help. Rebecca's marriage, according to the Family Gossip Network, started off rocky. Turns out that discovering your new wife is capable of casual cruelty toward her own family is the kind of revelation that makes a person wonder what other surprises might be hiding beneath the surface. But all of that became background noise to the life I was building without them. Have you ever realized that the people who were supposed to love you most were actually the people holding you back from becoming who you were meant to be? If you have, then you know what I learned that night by the lake. Sometimes love means walking away. Sometimes family means choosing the people who choose you back. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the permission to stop trying to fit into spaces that were never designed to hold you. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply tell the truth and let it speak for itself. Comment below and let me know where you're watching from, but more importantly, let me know if you've ever found the courage to walk away from people who treated you like you didn't count. Because you do count, you have always counted. And anyone who tries to convince you otherwise doesn't deserve a seat at your table, no matter how much DNA you share. The wedding was supposed to be about celebrating love, but it became about learning the difference between love and obligation, between family and DNA, between keeping the peace and keeping your soul. I chose my soul, and I've never looked back.